folks. Welcome to the Chicago Burlington and Quincy Railroad and the Chicago and Northwestern Railway in Wyoming. Today is July 3rd, 2025, and this is Layout Update number 68. I'm Mark Pruitt, Track Inspector. I worked steadily in the train room during June on several different projects. I continued working on the Cody branch, installing subroadbed and track from Powell to Vocation. I began moving all the stuff that was displaced from under the canyon/Thermopolis Peninsula by the Cody benchwork to new locations. I spent quite a bit of time on the GN Pacific, and I began preparations for installation of the Popo Agie River Bridge into Lander. I don't mention this often because I get tired of hearing it in almost every video I watch, but if you like my videos, why not subscribe and hit the like button? It doesn't cost anything, it's easy, and it helps expose the channel to more people. And you can always unsubscribe later if you change your mind. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, I have a Patreon page set up where you can sign up for any of 4 different levels of support. Link is in the description. None of the money from the donations goes into the layout. It all goes to improve the channel, helping purchase equipment like studio lights, tripods, the prompter, and recording gear. And with that out of the way, let me show you what happened on the layout during the month of June. We'll start with one of the smaller projects, preparations for extending track into Lander. In this 2-year-old picture of the end of the subroadbed, which the bridge is sitting on near Lander itself, you can see how the subroadbed bows downward. It stayed that way, untouched, for just under 2 years. Early in June, I clamped a level across the gap between the new Lander subroadbed to the left, to the approach from Hudson on the right, to hold the bowed subroadbed straight. Most of this subroadbed would be removed for the bridge, but a few inches at the right end, what will become the east approach to the bridge, would remain. I left it that way for about a week while I did other things, then I came back to it. In order to straighten out the subroadbed at the east bridge approach, I glued 1x2 pine to the bottom of the subroadbed on both sides of the riser. The end of the 1x2 is about where the subroadbed would be cut off. Then, using a pole saw, I cut off the extra subroadbed. Following that, I removed the near side benchwork stringer from the last joist to the end. Once done, the east end approach looked like this. That 2x3 cleat to the left was all that remained to be removed. Since that cleat was screwed to the wall-mounted stringer from the backside, I couldn't just unscrew it. Using a wood chisel, I chipped the cleat away a little bit at a time until only the 2 screws were left protruding out from the stringer. I removed the screws flush with the stringer using a cutoff wheel and a Dremel and a large pair of pliers. Next step will be to span the gap to the Lander benchwork using a slightly lowered 1x2 frame to make room for the river. I'll get to that sometime in the next few months. The next small project for the month was adding more oil and grease drippings to the Powder River siding. I left off in early May with it looking like this. When I finished up on June 21st, the siding was much grimier with a lot more grease and oil just outside the rails where the old journal boxes would have dripped over time. At this point, I'm about ready to ballast the main line past the siding. I may add some more grass and weeds near the siding at this end, and then I still have to add sagebrush to the entire area. Any bets on when I get to that? In last month's update, I had the Cody benchwork to this point, and I mentioned that I planned to finish the last small section of benchwork in June. That would finish all major benchwork construction on the entire layout. Well, I had overextended myself physically crawling around under the peninsula, so for a couple weeks in June I just wasn't up to benchwork building, so I didn't get it done. Maybe in July. But that doesn't mean I didn't get any work done on the Cody branch. I went ahead with adding subroadbed and track into the branch from Powell. As I mentioned last month, I built a couple sections of subroadbed that would go next to the furnace on a table where I could do a decent job of laying the track. Right after the last update, I got the track installed. Then it was a simple matter to move the pre-built section into place and cut and install risers. Here it's been roughly positioned and is supported on just a few temporary risers. I set the final position of the new subroadbed from the Powell end where the curved subroadbed had already been installed. Once aligned, I connected the new section to the curve and spent several days setting the grade and installing risers. Then came the cork roadbed and we're ready for track. This area right in here will be a small scene depicting the railroad and highway bridge over Alkali Creek. When I was 8 or 9 years old and living in Cody, I remember driving along this now abandoned highway and crossing under the railroad at this point. I want to add this spot to the layout. On a trip through Wyoming in 1990, I stopped and took several photos of the area so I could model it someday. Looks like someday is getting closer, not more than a decade or so off now. Back to the build. On June 16th, I laid the last 2 sticks of Code 70 track I had on hand. It didn't get me to the pre-laid track on the new subroadbed, so I had to order more track to proceed. Meanwhile, I decided I didn't want this leg sitting in front of vocation and getting in the way of the view and the operator's work at the siding, so I spent a few hours adding a new leg to the Cody bench work and moving the Thermopolis leg behind vocation. On the 24th, the new track arrived. On the 26th, I finished tying in the track from Powell to the pre-laid section behind the furnace. Trains can now run down the Cody branch all the way to the east turnout at vocation. The next day, I began installing wiring for the new track. I started stringing the new bus wires, then ran out of spade connectors. I'm stuck at this point until the new connectors arrive later this week. As I mentioned in last month's update, I had a lot of crap stored under the peninsula ever since I built it. With all that new bench work, I needed to find new places for it all. Under the staging yard under Casper was an obvious choice, but those long threaded rods sticking down were in the way. On June 17th, I cut the excess length off 2 of them. It was easier than I thought it would be. After I cut them, I dressed the cuts with a grinding stone in my Dremel. When the nuts threaded on easily, I was done. I'll cut more of those rods off in July or August. Even though I only cut the 2, it gave me room to move my tool shelf under the yard. I managed to get a lot of the stuff put away, but there's still more rearranging to do. Now on to the last major project of the month, the Great Northern Pacific. I left it at this point in the last update, disassembled with the mechanism lubed and ready to add the decoder to the tender. It was mid-June before I got back to the Pacific. I started by installing the speaker on the tender floor. To attach it, I added a small amount of adhesive caulk, the same stuff I glue the track down with, to the rim of the speaker. Then I pressed the speaker down over the tender floor holes and set it aside for the caulk to cure. Next, I prepared for installation of the loco to tender connector through the front of the tender. In this before shot, you can see the 2 holes where the lead from the old onboard decoder went to the motor. Since I wanted to install a TCS 6-pin micro connector, I used a cutting ball in my Dremel and opened one of the holes up into a rectangular shape. In this picture, you can see the female end of the connector where the right hole used to be. Then it was just a matter of installing the decoder and wiring it all up. That took a few hours over several days. In this view, all the tender wiring has been done. The decoder itself is mounted here in the tender shell, with the keep alive on the opposite side. The clothespin is holding the loco to tender connector in place while the superglue dries. I had to pop the connector loose and reinstall it 3 times before I had it in the right place. Wiring the locomotive itself was easy. I couldn't recover the headlight wires, so I'll leave that as a future project. Since the tender handles the electrical pickup, only 2 wires needed to be connected to the motor. In this view, they're just temporarily connected to check polarity. On the 26th, decoder installation and wiring were complete and ready for testing. Before reassembling the boiler and pilot truck, I connected the loco to the tender and put the naked mechanism on the track at Casper. I fired up my DCC system and cracked the throttle. Success! The loco ran back and forth very smoothly. In this still shot from that test video you just saw, you can see how I used a few sections of heat shrink tubing, unshrunk, to bundle the wires into neat groups in the locomotive. On the 28th, I had the superstructure back on the chassis and the lead truck reinstalled. I ran the locomotive again. If this was successful, the next step would be a trip around the entire layout with a few passenger cars in tow. Things started out great, with smooth, slow-speed performance and acceleration. The loco ran out to Powder River Switch and I started it back in reverse to come back to Casper. That's when things went wonky. In the curve just east of Powder River, the loco began shorting intermittently across the rails. My NCE system track LED began flashing, indicating a short on the track, and the loco staggered along the keep-alive, keeping it moving. The test was not a success. I didn't smoke the decoder, so the problem isn't in the wiring. I think the lead truck may be shorting intermittently against the boiler as it swings for the curve. But why only in reverse? Some investigation is needed. First step will be to remove the pilot truck and run the test again. If the loco backs smoothly through the curves, I'll know where to look for the fault. If not, I'll have to check the boiler for a shorting problem somewhere. Once the engine is running smoothly, I'll add the number to the cab and tender. It will become number 1715 on the roster. June 25th was the 5th anniversary of starting the construction of this layout, so I posted the usual birthday video on YouTube. The link is in the description. Finally for the month, on June 29th, I attended the Cheyenne, Wyoming train show. I came across a full set of Intermountain CB&Q drop bottom gondolas. These will be great for beat service. I don't generally buy ready-to-run freight cars, but these were priced low and the cars look great, so I grabbed them up. Hopefully, I'll have them ready for beat season for October's operating session. And that's it for June. Not nearly as frantic a month as May was, but I got a respectable amount of work done, I think. In July, I hope to get back to the ice house. I just ignored it in June. First priority, though, other than the operating session on the 22nd, will be resolving the shorting issue with the Pacific. If I have time, I'll get that last section of Cody benchwork done and maybe add the riverbed support for the Popo Agie River near Lander. How much I get done overall is up in the air, though, because I have a lot of work to do just to get the train room cleaned and the layout prepped for the operating session. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next month. Last month we closed out 2007. Today we'll move into 2008. By late January, I had the fascia painted at Glenrock and was beginning to install the backdrop. I jumped around a bit to different parts of the layout at the time. In early March, I began installation of the engine terminal at Laurel. Then it was right back to Glenrock, building up the first scenery substrate. In early April, it was back to the engine terminal in Laurel again. Mid-April saw installation of the first section of benchwork for the upper deck over Glenrock. And in late April came a bit more scenery base. And that's the way it was the first 4 months of 2008. Thank you and good night from all of us at CB&Q News.